Good day, everybody. It's been a few weeks, and it's been heck of a first few weeks of this year. Lots of uh, interesting news, not really related to the furry fandom. Usually, I cover furry news and furry topics, but obviously, this news that happened earlier this year on January 6th is sort of so big that it sort of makes one think about how these sort of things tie together and sort of how people react to it and all this other things. So I wanted to let it die down a little bit before giving my commentary about it. But here we go. So not like we have anything better to do. We're still locked in because of COVID, right? So we're basically forced to bear witness to this situation. Now, I'll start this off by saying that the internet is a tool, and as with most tools in humanity, there's a good purpose and there's a bad purpose. You can use the tools to move forward in your endeavors in life, or you can use it to veg out and not really get anywhere, or you can use it to hinder and hurt yourself and hurt your opportunities and prosperity. Those are basically the three ways that you can interact with any tool. And unfortunately, as we come to find ourselves using the internet more and more, it's become apparent that there's a tale of two cities, as it were. There's literally two sort of sides of the internet. There's the side of the internet that's used to create community, and there's the kind that is used to destroy community, or utilize the fears and anxieties in a person to lash out at community, and the fear of losing community, and the fear of being ostracized by community. And that fear sort of has a self-sustaining loop. I know this because I'm a furry, and as a furry, a lot of furries have experienced this kind of social isolationism. Many of us who are furries, statistically, were not treated very well in our primary education institutions, school, for the layman's terms. We were usually isolated or socially seen as different or odd or strange, and we never understood why. Some of us learn that because our identity is a little bit different than others, whether it's because of gender identity or political identity or other such things. Um, the truth of the matter is that furry came together as a community of outcasts, and as a community of outcasts, we created a community. Um, we, like the outcasts of society, the media treated us very poorly. The media was very, very mean to us, very, very treated us as second class citizens, treated us with disrespect, and placed labels on us that didn't necessarily apply to the whole deal, right? And used the extremes of our group in order to dismiss those you know who are not the basically the fringe or the extremely strange. Um, but the reality is that at the end of the day, furries found a way to persevere despite that. And on the internet, we found each other. Without the internet, we wouldn't. Without the internet, we wouldn't know. We wouldn't have found ourselves in this community. We wouldn't have found this community to give us something to participate in, to give our voice to. And without it, maybe we would have found ourselves continuing to be isolated, to be a little afraid, to not understand how to handle the media and how to rub off and how to wipe off the stain that they tried to throw upon you in a calm, cool, and demeanor manner. Many people have worked hard in the furry fandom to get the furry fandom to have them interact with the press better, and thus over time, over decades of time, earn somewhat of an odd respect from the media, or at least what one would call the mainstream. Despite being the black sheep of the communities, eventually we kept being who we are. We kept creating. We kept our nose to the grindstone, and we allowed ourselves to represent ourselves to the media better, to promote who we are and not to go too hard on the and not to worry too much about the the sort of jovial and odd things that the media would say about us at times. We didn't let him get to us, and that was based on the hard works of people and education, people who worked in PR, people who worked with media and things like that, spreading their knowledge in the community to help de-escalate the situation. Now it comes in turn that there was another organization that started to show up around the 2016 election, and it had its little risings before then. But 2016 was really when that sort of community was starting to come to a head, and even showed some semblance of having infiltration, even within the furry spaces. And that is of those who lost patience, got angry, and used that anger not to create a community, but to basically be a chamber of anger that echoes over and over again to the point where the anger couldn't sustain itself within the walls of the internet anymore. Without a creative outlet and without any things to work toward, they find themselves stuck. And that being stuck led to that anger. Interestingly enough, there are furries who fall within this group, even within our own community. As our community has grown larger and larger, there are individuals within the community who have been around for a long time, yet they're hitting a creative wall, or they're hitting a wall where their audience no longer finds their content, finds their content either acceptable or finds their content enjoyable, right? It was so much easier when the group was small, when there was not a lot of competition, but as the group grew larger and larger, more people with more talent started to pour in. And it is by some random piece of luck, along with skill, that I have been allowed to run this YouTube channel, that I have been allowed to write for Führer as a news organization. But it wasn't all luck as well. It was me wandering about, going walkabout. I knew that I was a writer. I've been writing fiction ever since I could write a paragraph. Like I wrote silly little fictions about powerful rings when I was in 5th grade, and I look back at that notebook and I'm like, man, paragraphs. It's like the page is just one big log of text. No one's gonna read this, and obviously grammar issues and using commas incorrectly and all those other things. I don't have a copy of it anymore, unfortunately. I remember though that I was writing since basically 5th grade. I was writing fiction since 5th grade. As corny and as silly as they probably were, and as kid-like as they probably were because of my inexperience with the world. But through the lens of fiction, dealing with adversity, one can work their way towards nonfiction. And, being a writer in that way, I evolved into the nonfiction section as I realized that that's what my bread and butter is. I'm interested in current events. I'm interested in communities and how they form. I'm interested in understanding human interaction in this way. And the furry fandom has been a great microcosm for me to see how communities grow and splinter off into groups. It's like you can go back to any religion and see that same splintering. You can go to political parties and see that same splintering. And through that knowledge, it's like you start to see patterns in that kind of thing. And so, like, that was an opportunity for me And I'm very grateful for it, because if that opportunity wasn't there, if I didn't have this to focus on, and in the area in which I grew up in, I could have easily very much been on that dark side of the web, on the one that doesn't look for furs, but looks for Führers, right? I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be surprised or and shocked in the least if I knew at least one of my classmates was down there in the Capitol that day. That's the kind of school I grew up in, and I wouldn't be shocked nor surprised. Heck, I would say probably a handful of them. The reality is that luckily through education and through the furry fandom, I was able to be introduced to so much more culture than I would have been otherwise. Furry conventions take place in more urban areas. I would have never been able to explore those urban areas, been able to communicate with people on the streets. One of the most interesting things that happened to me at Anthrocon was, I think there's this group of persons of color, this like group of black individuals. I think they were at a meeting at the at the what's it called, the African American uh, building across the street from the West End. They were in the lobby of the West End, and I was sitting on the little side stairs there near the stairs. There's a bench near the stairs, and they came up and they're like, "Hey man, what's all this about?" So interestingly, it's like I'm like, internally you're thinking it's like, oh, they found the right person to talk to about this kind of thing. And so like it was interesting because we went through the normal chit chat kind of things, and they're like, and I go, yeah, it's like we have our it's like, and they we talked about the politic of it and stuff like that, and we also talked about like what is this all about and all this kind of stuff. And it was a great conversation because like they're like, oh, there's actual people, black furries. It's like, yeah, like there's as I said, they're a minority, just as in society, it's mostly it's mostly cisgender white males, but there are very talented person of color furries in this fandom. Um, there's Witchy Bunny, there's Sonic Fox. I definitely mentioned Sonic Fox. He's a world class fighter player and fighting game player. Um, you know Bucktown Tiger, who does music and is a Jeopardy 7-time champion. So like you kind of use your knowledge and share knowledge, and it builds bridges, right? But and furry fandom allowed me to build those bridges. Whereas in the other side of the internet, in the dark side, you build walls. You become afraid of the outside world. You're scared of your own shadow. You watch probably too much investigative reporting stories about murders that happen every freaking, murders that happen very, very infrequently, but it colors your worldview to such a point that you barely get out of your own house and would be very scared to do so otherwise. It can be very, um, it can make the world seem cold, but when you find, but like the furries, right? People who were normally isolated wouldn't be able to express their isolated feelings with other people. These people who are angry and isolated and feeling left behind wouldn't be able to speak to each other. As with the internet gives us the power to do that. With furries, it's the same thing, right? Only with furries, it's like, oh, this artist is cool. Oh, this thing is that, and I want to promote this artist. And I want to do this thing. There are issues with clout chasing and things like that, as with any community. Um, but for the most part, good artists promote good artists, good writers promote good writers. People try to promote the best of each other instead of trying to promote the worst. Some people lose their faith and lose their way sometimes and try to muckrake towards other people, things that necessarily don't need to be muckraked. But in a growing community, that's something that can occur. But in that other darker side, that is the standard bearing. It is the standard vying for position, um, trying to give yourself a title and feel special and feel important to the point where you're taking shortcuts that might lead to a dead end. They become impatient with themselves and they become impatient with society. They want to be someone more important. They have an executive fetish, and that's a term I'm going to be using a lot in the coming weeks and months. Basically, they pine for power and recognition, but don't realize that those things come in time. Those things are built up in time, and those things are eroded pretty quickly. But they know that it's eroded very quickly, which is why they muckrake more so than any furries typically do. They'll throw mud at somebody and go, "Well, this person's this way." Now, furries do it. I will say furries do it a little bit more often than they should. But these guys do it, and they do it on steroids. They look for weaknesses. They pick, and they try to erode. And they do it, and they did it with our government. They made people question the system of our government. They made people question the people counting the ballots, the professional people that are doing the thing that they do. They count the ballots. There's people on the left wing and people on the right wing. There's the two-party system. They're working and they're counting the ballots. And both of them come to the agreement that Biden won the majority of the election. But they don't trust it because they're not in the circle, right? They're not in that circle. So they don't trust it. And if they don't trust it, then they're going to get together and they're going to overthrow it. And that society can't work that way. You have to have some semblance. And on top of that, they're only supposed to have power for 4 years anyway. Getting angry about somebody having power for 4 years, 4 years can be a long time if you're worried about your loved ones and your families. But it's not as long as Russia or China. It's not as long as those other president for life sort of countries. And the weakness of those countries is just flat out what happens when the great leader dies. There's a power vacuum, and that power vacuum has to get filled with something. And it's going to be filled with fighting. If America is stirred by what happened on January 6th, imagine it, somebody who was a president for life leaving a power vacuum. This is the reason what we have rotationary cycles, is because we need to keep people vying for being good leaders and people coming up to the challenge of being good leaders. I think too often we have an executive fetish, as I said, but in essence, it'll become better in time, I think, as people start to answer or start to ask questions about, more localized leadership and how to get more, looking closer to home to make sure that your home system's in order and helping in that way. I think that's one of the strengths that the right wing has over the left sometimes, but they lost sight of that. They lost sight of looking out for the local community, and they pined for huge power, huge globalist power, containing. Getting a little off topic, but the reality is that these angry people found themselves on the internet. They came together with their anger and their vitriol and their hatred of others. And sometimes, by the way, there's a pattern here, and I don't know why people haven't really discussed this, but it's something you should note because this is really important. And I'm going to tell you this right now. There is a pattern of people being failed artists and failing their dreams and failing their chase of their dreams and becoming parts of these kind of groups. It literally most of the time has nothing to do with politics. It usually has to do with a personal failure that they cannot get over. And I'll tell you this: the Viking guy who stood on at the Senate, the guy with the Viking helmet, the Viking shaman guy. Don't know his name. Don't care. He's a failed actor. He had a dream of being a big actor, right? Didn't quite make the cut. Perry Rhodes was a furry that I knew on LiveJournal a decade ago. They had a regular sort of soap opera style art thing that they wrote, and they basically had a dream of like having that be recognized, having that be a thing that was recognized. And obviously, a serial like that, it's hard to get a readership because on a serial, right, you have to have somebody who, it's sort of like a thing where it's like someone's got to read it from start to end. And as you write more and more of that serial over time, the book just becomes larger and larger. And in this sort of style of bite sized content, long form content usually doesn't do too well. So, in essence, they probably didn't have too many feedback from too many people. Maybe a few people enjoyed their work. Um, but the interesting thing is that the people who lead those kind of organizations will sometimes go, well, if you believe in our political ideology, maybe we'll give your works a chance, right? We'll let your art thrive, right? Instead of allowing art to run free, they take art and they make it their own. They decide what is art and what is not art. What is unter art, right? What is blasphemous art? What is faux pas art? Which brings me obviously to the big H dude himself, you know, the big old Adolf, a failed artist, a traditional artist, who is stymied by the concept of modernism coming into the world, and modernism causing it so that he didn't get into art school. Now everyone points out now that, looking back, goes, well, he was a mediocre artist anyway. Obviously, people might have some judgment on that. I don't know. I'm not an artist from that period, so I don't know, and I'm not a good judger of art anyway. What I can tell you is that he failed at his dream of being an artist, and that rage that he felt from that seethed out into his politics. Especially after he took over the political diagram and made it so that, obviously his art was showing, along with other traditional artists, and postmodernism was, seen as beneath them, and swing music and all this other new postmodern musics and arts, right, stifled because the man himself wasn't all that creative, or wasn't as creative as others. um, I think that's a big issue, when it comes to why people go down the dark side, is that they give themselves too much. They don't want to have a 9 to 5 gig. Everyone dreams of being an artist, or a musician or comedian or these other things, and they fail at it. And then they get together in a group with other people who failed at those endeavors, and they let their anger and rage at the world bubble up. They start blaming other things. They start blaming the world, the environment. If only the environment were different, their art would be seen as wonderful and beautiful. But the world is what it is, and the only way you can change it is if you force it to change. And they use that anger to try to push for a world where their art is accepted over others, not competing on equal scale, but now competing in a world where they decide what art is, that they will promote their community's works over the community's works of others, of other cultures, of other people. That's where it all stems from. There is an element of that to it, and I think that those who ignore that are deceiving themselves. We have a pattern. We see that. So how do we do about doing that? Well, we can't just say that art is good just because somebody's making us feel coerced, because that's not freedom. And so it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, how do you you work towards probably saying, here's what you could do better, right? Instead of just saying your work sucks and dismiss it, say, here's what you can do to be better. Here's the things I would suggest. Don't write a whole on serial. Write short stories. Get your name out there. Do that. I got some like short stories published and things like that. I think that's one of the biggest things that kind of I learned from this is because when Perry Rhodes and I got into it, sort of a tit for tat on one of my other comment sections, it kind of came out that they were angry that I had flair and I had this YouTube channel and I had all these opportunities that they didn't as an older person. That's the thing though, is that like it's like if they were just truthful about that, like I would say there's nothing to really be jealous about. Like they, as a person on LiveJournal, had inspired me to look into the past of furry fandom. And it's unfortunate that they let themselves go down that path because it made me lose a lot of respect for them. And if they had just stood their ground, I would have spoken, great things of them. I don't know if they're still around, if Perry Rhodes is still around, or if he went down another path. I heard that he might have removed himself from the whole furry fandom and Raiders. But the truth of the matter is that we probably all know somebody who is taken by COVID, and we probably all know somebody who's taken by, fascism, by anger, by frustration of society. And so we've all lost something in 2020. In 2021, we use those things that we lost to reflect upon what we want to see in society in the future, so that the future generations don't have to deal with the same confusions and anger that we do. And how do you go about doing that? It can be very tricky, especially with people manipulating things for their own benefit rather than for the benefit of all. But that's always been a thing, and it will continue to be. I think that the internet as a tool has the capacity to bring together people in love and respect, but it also has the capacity of making lone wolves find a pack to feast and to attack. It's Pandora's box, honestly. You can't really close it again. Though I will say this before I blame the internet on everything. It has been a conversation point of the mainstream media to point the fingers at Jack from Twitter or Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, that all this blood and all this anger lies solely at their feet. I would argue that that's not the case. I would argue that while Facebook and Twitter were the oxygen that sort of fanned the flames and sort of feeded the fire as it was burning, the seed of that fire, the thing that lit the match, was Trump himself. Trump inserting politic into the internet, making the internet a very pushy place to push um, this sort of um, rhetoric, right? To push this sort of idealism, sort of this sort of anger at the world, right? And deceiving people into thinking that everything that's not going their way is because of some fake and ominous conspiracy. But the thing of the matter is that Trump didn't have power because of the internet. Trump learned how to use the internet to maintain his power. But his power started long before the internet was even conceived. His power started from his relationships, his business ties, and particularly with the mainstream media. That very same mainstream media that looks at us and blames us for these problems. Particularly, there was a video, and I'll put a link up there, from the Joe Scarborough, the Morning Joe show, where Mika describes how the internet is to blame for these situations, and how but this is where I say the main her bosses and her executives at MSNBC were the ones that created The Apprentice. They're the ones that interviewed Donald Trump as a viable candidate because he already had all these ties with the media, with the mainstream media. And it's their conversations to the mainstream media that gave him validity, that oozed onto the internet. Because his target audience were mostly television. When I was in college, something called reality television started to come on the air, and I hated it. And I don't know why I hated it, but I think it was a good thought, because I'm like, reality television is just going to destroy everything. And I thought I was exaggerating when I thought that in college, but here we are. Reality television destroyed everything. Congratulations, guys. Good job. No, it's Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Thompson. No. Jack Thompson. Well, Jack Thompson's his own backwards. What the heck is Jack's last name anyway from Twitter? I have no idea. Jack. I don't know Jack. But, Jack from Twitter and Mark Zuckerberg, it's all their fault. It's like, no. You guys at NBC, in the mainstream media, not just Fox News, are the ones that planted him. You're the ones that put the seed in the ground. The plant just grew out of the ground and used his popularity from The Apprentice to push himself into politics. Because, by the way, he pushed himself into politics. He's always been interested in trying to become the president. He did that in the 90s. Many people forget about that. But the reality is that this thing has been going on. The internet was just a tool that he used in order to achieve more power. It is the dragon that he used. And it seems no coincidence that the Revelations talks of a dragon, right? And that, hey, the book that talks about computer compilers is called the Dragon Book. I thought that was a weird coincidence, but it's like we're talking to everybody on everything now. We can use this device that we have to come together as a community to do better for one another, to make stronger communities, to build stronger bonds with people, or we can use it to isolate ourselves further, to put up more walls, to get more angry at each other. We can use it as a bridge, or we can use it as a wall. But it is the whole thing about freedom is the freedom to build the communities that you want to see. And I would hope that those communities are big and beautiful and bountiful. I would hope that they're not bullying, belligerent, and bodacious. I don't know. I was trying to make alliterations there and sound cool, but it just, I couldn't think of a third B word there. I'm breaking the fourth wall, and I do this impromptu, so whatever. Anyways, hopefully we as the furry community continue to grow, continue to prosper on the internet, and hopefully other communities will learn to break the shackles and the bands under which they give themselves, and free themselves from the individuals that speak a kind word to them but see them as fodder, see them as cattle for their purposes. The people who went on to Washington and marched on Washington on January 6th are not going to be helped by Trump. They're not going to be helped by the people of their community. They're going to be seen as cannon fodder, as lost causes. If the police are on them, they're just going to throw them aside. They're going to call them Antifa. The very thing that community said is the omnibus of all evil, the omnibus of all horrible things. And as soon as the fire's on them, as soon as they're seen politically in an unfavorable light, as soon as the cameras are on them and they're doing horrible things and they're doing, these kind of radical things, all of a sudden their colleagues that were supposed to be behind them are calling them Antifa / communist / infiltrators. That's not a community. That's a political game of footsie. That's political hacky sack. If a person's not going to stand up for you because you're a little bit weird or a little bit strange and you had a bad day, they're not going to stand up for you ever. Remember that. If you got away with it, and if you quote unquote got away with it, use it as an opportunity to change your direction. Because I can trust you. Trust me, it's not worth going after a person. It's not worth going after a goal of having a president for life. You want one of those? We will pay your way to Russia or China, and you can go live there. That's not how our system works. We don't fetishize the executive. We don't pine for the executive. We don't pine for an executive to rule over our country. We need to start working as states again. We need to start working towards understanding our communities on the ground level, because that's our strength. United States is it's an odd contradiction of words. If they're united, how come they're states? And if they're states, how come they're united? It understands that human beings working together can create great things, but also understands that if you give too much power to things that can do great things, that those things can become corrupted and thus sometimes need to be given up. Throughout the history of humanity, we've had great empires expand only to have their great leader die, and then all of a sudden the entire state shatters into multiple different countries. It's happened again. It's happened again and again and again and again. So when you have a group of countries, I mean, you have a country that is a group of states, you allow it so that if one state's having a bad time, the other state steps in to lift it up. And not because it's a blue state or a red state, because it's a state. That's what the design is for. It's to outlive us. It's to outlive Trump. It's to outlive Biden. It's to outlive the donkeys or the elephants. Because the donkeys and the elephants are going to be 200 years from now. Democrats and Republicans are going to be completely different from what they are today, if they exist at all. You have to think long term. And if you give up on yourself and you give up on your abilities to get your dreams, then you're not going to be able to fulfill the dreams of a country. You're not going to be able to fulfill the dreams of a nation. Learn to build a community. Learn to use the tools that you've been given to build a community and build something strong. And I've got to say, I've been really blessed to have found the furry fandom and to see a community that has been able to build itself from the ground up, from isolated places across the world, to build a community that extends upon oceans, expands beyond the skies, expands beyond anything. That we're all connected, despite our distance. And we come together to create. We don't come together to destroy. And that's always been what we've been about. Hopefully, more denizens of this internet can learn to do the same in the future. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this kind of content, kick the like and kick the subscribe button. Kick a comment in the comment section. Oh, man, YouTube. I forgot I was recording things for YouTube. Anyways, thank you very much. Have a good one. We'll see you next time.